Hi, I'm Tracey.
Hi, and I'm Faye, and welcome to More Better with Tracey and Faye.
Today, Faye and I are going to dig deeper into the world of creating presentation slides, or also taking into consideration your whole presentation deck. Now, in episode 6, we talked a lot about how to use compelling headlines to make each slide in your deck more meaningful, which is, we still believe that, it's still true. But today we're going to look a little bit beyond the headlines, and we're going to talk about 4 elements that you need to consider when creating your next presentation. You know, Faye, I can clearly, scarily remember being asked to create a presentation with the guidance being, we need a slide on this, and a slide on this, and a slide on this, and a slide on this. And then I would just go and create a slide on this, and a slide on this, and a slide on this. And if there's room, maybe we can squeeze in another slide on another topic. But at the time, I never considered the totality of these slides. I never thought, what story am I telling? What message am I delivering with this presentation that I'm creating? I just accepted my marching orders and put together the deck one slide at a time. But here at More Better, wherever here is, here in the webosphere of More Better, we are all about progress, not perfection. And I know for me, my knowledge about what makes a great presentation has certainly progressed since those days.
Yeah, I agree. Though I am going to blame presentation software and templates for just a minute. It's not our fault. Never was our fault. No. Things haven't changed in terms of those asks, right? I see a lot of those asks around, I need one slide. I need you to create one slide that goes into this great big deck. Those asks still exist. And the asks around, I need 3 slides, I need an agenda, or I need a purpose, whatever. So we accept that those things still happen. But what we can do, one last thing. What we can also do is think about how to best create, as you say, that story. What is the content in the slide? How does it all come together? I think what's happened is that since the 80s, the defaults of agenda, point 1, 2, and 3, summary, and next step. I think what people might be thinking, and hey, I was guilty of that, already, but they think that makes a good presentation deck. So it's easy to fall into that default. And let's face it, slides, creating them takes a lot of energy and time. Being able to distill your information into like one little slide isn't always easy. Also, as we know, broken record depends on our audience and objectives. And there's always a time crunch. So presentation decks, whether they're created in PowerPoint or elsewhere, they can be used for reports or materials intended only to be read, or they can also be used for live presentations where you, the speaker, are more important than your deck. So depending on how you use your deck, there are 4 elements, as Tracey introduced. It's how you apply them that differs. But we will discuss that another time. So for today's episode, let's look at 4 elements that need to be considered for any presentation. They are structure, language, data, and design. Tracey, start us off with structure and language, please.
You betcha. So before I dive into structure, I just have to say, in my head, when I see DATA, I say data. Oh, and you always say data, and it's just really funny. And every time you say that, I think of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
And I'm not a Trekkie at all. So I am a nerd, but I'm not.
You're a nerd. Oh, you're a Trekkie. Yeah. Funny.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, that is Fun not fact. A thing, but it's just, it's a thing. All right. So structure, what do we mean by structure? What we mean by structure is, in totality, like I introduced off the top, what actually is your presentation saying? So from beginning slide, what your information is there, through to the ones in the middle and the end, does it have a complete thought? I don't want to say complete story because people often get turned around. Do I have to tell a story with characters and a plot? No, you don't. But think of your story as the order of information that you create your slides. And that structure matters. because if it's confusing going from one slide to the next, either as a reader or as someone watching you present, I'm going to be confused. I need to be pulled along in a way that makes sense to me. So you want to look at the order of your information. And we also have this thing called vertical logic and horizontal logic. So vertical logic is about what is happening on an individual slide. You have some kind of compelling headline. It is an assertion of some sort. It is a key message of some sort. It is the thing you want people to remember from that slide, which is why, as Faye pointed out, you don't want the top of your slide to say purpose. You want it to say something meaningful. So you say something meaningful in that space, and using vertical logic or applying it, have everything else on that slide relate directly to what that headline is. Horizontal logic is logic that goes from one slide to the next. And that is from reading your headlines across the 2 or 3 or 5 or 20 slides in your deck. And knowing that people like to skim. So let's say this is a report slide, a report presentation, not a presentation deck. People skim. So if they're going to get your 20-page deck, they're either going to print it out and skim it by hand, or they're going to flip through it on their computer. And guess what? They're reading headlines. So give them something to read. Give them something that makes sense when it's being skimmed. And that will get your horizontal and your vertical logic working, and it will make the structure of your presentation much more strong. The other thing I'm going to mention here, and we're going to mention it throughout the rest of this episode, is this idea of hierarchy of information. That means the most important thing on your slide is easily absorbed by the audience at a glance. And then there's secondary and tertiary information, depending on how much information is required on your slide. But making sure that the most important stuff is most easily read is the key to the structure of your slide and your entire deck, having a good foundation on which you can build the rest of your content. So around structure, it's about the entirety of your presentation. Also within each slide, build a structure, have a structure that makes sense to you, and it will make the rest of the building blocks for your presentation make more sense. So that is structure. Now, when we get to language, these are the words that you're going to use. And particularly in a presentation, if you're making the presentation rather than it being a report, use words only when nothing else will work. Because you don't want especially if you're up presenting, you don't want your audience reading your slides. If you've got so many words up there that they're spending their time back there reading what's behind you rather than focusing on what you are having to say, then the balance is off. You have too many words on your screen, so the people aren't even paying attention to you. So there's other elements that go into a deck, and Faye's going to talk more about those too, and data and design. But for text, it's important, but use it only when nothing else will work. And then when you do use text, use it minimally. Don't overwhelm people with big, long sentences. You do not ever want to have a sentence that goes across the entire length of your slide, whether in report or in presentation mode. So be brief always. That is about, edit yourself down. Edit down your work to the most important things that you want to say. Make sure that your main point of your assertion is clear. And use language that your audience will understand. Don't use big words. Don't use big technical words or small technical words if you're talking to a non-technical audience. If you are talking to an executive audience, use words and information that will resonate for them. They probably are a lot less interested in the background detail of what you're talking about than they are about the big numbers around revenue or expense or exposure or any of those things that will matter to that audience. So know what matters to your audience. Speak to them in a language they understand and can accept and appreciate about the things that they can understand. The other thing I want to say around text or language is for callouts. A really effective place to have some information on your slide is to use a callout. But let's use them properly. So think of a callout as that soundbite. It's that provocative detail or data point. It's maybe a quote or a testimonial that emphasizes the key idea that you said where? You got it in your headline. It's also a call to action. So maybe I've made an assertion, I've shown all this evidence that supports this assertion that I've made, and then there's an action I want people to take, the people who are getting this or watching this presentation. So I'll put that in the call out because it is something separate, but important. And so I'll put that into a call out. So those are a few things that you want to think about around language. So at this point, so I've done structure, language, the other two elements that you're going to need to think about when creating a deck or a presentation, slide or deck, data and design. And for those, I'm going to hand over to Faye.
Data. Now I'm going to say data, not data.
Oh, I don't want to make you uncomfortable.
I also don't want to be associated with Star Trek. No, I'm just joking. So, all right, data for you non-Star Trekkies. All right, as Tracey mentioned, in your presentation, you're likely trying to persuade your audience to consider something. There's, or do something. So that's a recommendation, a proposal, a change in working, perhaps. So you're going to need data and evidence to back it up. Data. See, I keep saying data, and evidence to back it up. The main point about data, I got to stick to it. The main point about data here is to use it intentionally and make it clean and obvious for your audience as to how it supports this assertion, claim, recommendation, etc. Now, it's easy to generate those charts and graphs from your spreadsheets and modeling platforms. So for me, I have made two suggestions or two things I'm going to focus on. How to using the right data to support your claim. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. And two, displaying that data in a way that's easy for your audience to understand. So first thing about selecting your data. For your main presentation, whether you're doing a report or you're speaking to a presentation, be selective and choose the best supporting data points that support your assertion or claim. What does your audience need in order to believe that there's a problem in employee retention? What is the proof that you can offer that a problem exists in, say, translating awareness into sales? So I'll leave that up to you, the expert, to determine what's the best data to use. But I recommend that you curate it so that it reveals or exposes the issue or challenge you're bringing to the forefront. I know that you're going to want to show all the facts and stats, and maybe that's really important for your audience or for this deck that you're creating. If it's that important, put it in the appendix. The appendix is your friend. So put all that information or background information into the appendix. But when you're using your deck to, again, persuade your audience to do something, consider something, you're asking for money, use the strongest data points to support those claims on your slides. So that's a couple points around selecting that data. Second point I want to talk about is displaying the data. Now, I recognize a little bit tricky here because we're going to talk about displaying something when we're speaking to it and we're not actually showing you. But I'm going to try my best here. So don't just generate that chart from Excel and then stick it on the slide, assuming your audience is going to make that connection. Those auto-generated charts are great, but they have a lot of extra noise. They have a lot of labels on the side. They've got something over here. They got something on the bottom, right? I would suggest use those charts and graphs. Use charts and graphs that everyone understands. Bar graphs, pie charts, those line graphs. It doesn't have to be, it has to be something that everyone in the room understands easily and in seconds. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it does have to be clear. There are all sorts of ways to display your data, and it's tempting to use something new, right? But again, I really stress, pick the easiest and simplest display. You do not want your audience straining. I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting like that, Tracey, where you're like sitting there straining to understand that graph and starting to question. And what happens is in our brains, they start to question. If I don't understand it, I start to question the credibility of that data. And you don't want that when you're asking for critical funding. You're asking for $100 million to support some program. When it's hard to understand the data, it starts to lead into mistrust about the overall claim that you're trying to make. So let's not do that. Yes, and I talking about those auto-generated graphs. I know I'm picking on you who love your Excel graphs. Those graphs have extraneous text. So I'll give you a quick example. So you might have a bar graph, and on the bottom it says, you've labeled it Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, right? You don't need a y-axis on the bottom that says quarters of 2024, right? It's redundant. It takes up space. So crop it. Use like if you're in PowerPoint, like just crop that little image out of it. Don't be afraid to retitle those graphs if the auto title isn't clear, and change the color so you can highlight what really matters. So if you have a bar graph and you want to highlight Q4 because it's super important, or Q1 because there was a problem there, make that whatever, like make everything gray and make that one orange or red or whatever colors you want to use. So that would be something that those are my sort of pet peeves around auto generated graphs. The other piece I'd also want to share is that don't rely on the data to tell your story. You're going to have great data to back up to back up your claim or your assertion, but use a call out, as Tracey mentioned, use it to provide your insight. That's what the audience is looking for. So, for example, you might have a pie chart that's like really important and prominent, and it's showing categories as an example, right? Maybe it's a pie chart with certain categories of employees. What about them? Maybe you break down one of those categories, you zero in because maybe there's a small slice of those employees, but they're highly influential. So tell us about that. Bring your perspective as to what your audience is really interested in, because and tell them, what are you seeing in the data and how does it support your claim, especially when you're asking for money or funding. So those are sort of my tips for data or data. All right, design. Again, totally recognize that we're talking about design and we're not showing you, but I'm going to try my best. You don't have to be a graphic designer. That's my first. To use good design principles. I know I just blasted like presentation templates back there, but these templates can incorporate basic and decent principles. So if you work for a large organization or mid to large organization, you probably have brand templates. Use them. Please use them. I know it feels boring. I know I've heard complaints from people. I don't want to use it. Everything is the same. But you are leveraging the credibility and integrity of your organization's brand. Even if you think, oh, it's only internal. It's only to the to this department. Leverage that brand, especially if you're presenting to decision makers. There's power in displaying that brand throughout the deck. If you're going to use colors, well, obviously you're going to use colors, icons, etc. Use them consistently throughout the deck. So if you're going to use an icon for, let's say, I don't know, a gear icon to talk about process, and then you're going to talk about process throughout your presentation, use that gear icon again, right? So that where our brains love consistency. They love to see, oh, I saw that, you use that icon here and you're going to talk about that deeper. Great. That'd be great. Don't go overboard with images. Sometimes they're distracting. I know clip art's a 80s, 90s thing. Hey, Tracey, 3D graphics can be, that's tricky, hard to read. Slide presentations, not everything has to be like, like this. Make them clean, right? Just make them appear if you need to. Depending on your culture and your audience, use appropriate imagery. So, for example, I worked in a culture that loves using memes. Now, not my personal style, but I had to adapt. So use things that are appropriate. And again, if your organization has, if you have for a large organization, they have internal photography, etc. Use that because again, you're leveraging the credibility of that brand. In terms of slide elements, couple quick tips. So use font sizes consistently. Font sizes for your headings, body, callouts. Use them consistently throughout your presentation. Use contrast. It's really hard to read. I know, again, white slide, black text. There's a reason why people use that all the time. It's harder to read when it's dark and then it's white text. It takes a little longer. So think about just how you want to use your text consistently and colors. And then white space. Tracey, you and I love white space, don't we? I love white space. So use white space. Don't be afraid to give your slides some time to breathe, because that helps your audience understand and absorb the information. So quick uses of good white space. You're providing a quote. Sometimes you see a slide, it's got a chart here, it's got a quote here, it's got like bullets down over there. I don't know where to look. It's okay. Maybe you need to, maybe there's a powerful quote or a testimonial you want to highlight, or stats you want to highlight. Use that space to give your audience that chance to absorb that information. Those are sort of the quick tips I have for design without showing it. Maybe we'll do something more visual next time.
Yes, we'll required video watching required.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. We're all good.
All right. So to recap, the 4 elements of a presentation deck or even a single slide that you need to think about every time: structure, language, data or data, and design. Now, under structure, I'd say if there was one thing, remember the hierarchy of information. Remember the concept of vertical and horizontal logic. Under language, remember to use text only when nothing else works. But when you do use text, use language that is meaningful and understandable to your audience. On data, I'm going to let Faye talk about the 2 high points she wants you to remember through data and design.
On data, I would say choose the best data to support your claim. Be very judicious around what's your claim and what's the best data points to support that. For design, I would say, there's so many tips there, but you don't have to be a graphic designer to know what good basic design looks like. So have confidence in yourself to sort of make those choices. And I would also add white space. White space is, we have a tendency to want to just fill everything up on that slide. And it's really, think of your audience. Where do you want their eyes to go first? What's the most important thing to look on that slide? So I would give your audience that time and space to absorb the information that you're bringing to them. All right. And if this was helpful to you, let us know. Subscribe to our channel or follow us on Spotify and Apple and any platforms where you find your favorite podcasts, like ours. And remember, we're happy to work with you and your teams on how to improve your communication skills, including how to create and deliver great presentations. Contact us and let's talk. And with that, I'm Faye.
And I'm Tracey. Join us next time on More Better with Tracey and Faye.